You are good to go.
Great. Welcome, everyone. This is the Board Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District on May 17th, 2023, beginning at about 12:42. Rebecca, would you like to do, or I should say, Madam Secretary, would you like to do a roll call?
Yes. Committee Chair Eccles.
Present.
Thank you. Director Mercurio.
Here.
Thank you. The staff who will be presenting today are Archives Program Supervisor Brenda Montano, IPM Specialist Pamela Bites, and Supervising Naturalist Christopher Sulots. Also, staff who will be present today include, or staff who are present today, include Assistant General Manager Ken Wysocki, Assistant General Manager Susan Shu, Chief of Stewardship Matt Grawl, and Acting Chief of Interpretive and Recreation Services Tiffany Margalici.
Wonderful. Okay, and now I'm going to ask Director Mercurio to do our land acknowledgement.
The East Bay Regional Park District's headquarters is located within Ranchland territory on the unceded lands of the Ohlone Chochenyo-speaking peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. The lands now encompassed within the boundaries of the East Bay Regional Park District are the ancestral territory of the Ohlone, Bay Miwok, and Delta Yokut. Today's Ohlone, Bay Miwok, and Delta Yokut people are thriving, vital members of the greater Bay Area community. They remain intrinsically connected to the land they have stewarded since time immemorial. So please join us in recognizing and honoring this land and their ancestors, elders, descendants, and all other members of their communities.
Great. And I think most of you know today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act. We are also providing live audio and video streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email, call in prior to the meeting for public comment or comment live via Zoom today. And of course, all information regarding participation in this meeting can be found on the agenda on the district website at ebparks.org. After each presentation, we'll take public comment. Do any of our committee, or I should say, does my fellow board member, Director Mercurio, have any questions before we begin? Or does anyone have any questions before we begin? Okay. And shout out, because I'm having trouble seeing some of you guys. So you just, if I don't call on you, please go ahead and just shout out too. Okay. So our first agenda item is Preserving Voices of the Land, East Bay Regional Park District's Ranchland Oral History Collection, presented by Archives Program Supervisor Brenda Montano. Is there any public comment on the first item?
We did not receive any public comments on this item.
Okay, great. And I assume there's nobody in the room wanting to speak. That is in public.
Don't see any hands raised for comment on.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So if Brenda, can you go ahead, please, then?
Thank you, Chair and Director Eccles and Director Mercurio. Again, my name is Brenda Montano, Archives Program Supervisor, and I have a presentation to share with you about our Ranchland Oral History Collection, and it is a refurbished presentation that I gave during the Grazers Dinner, which is a dinner that we do annually with grazing tenants to talk about different things. And this one was to let them know about our oral histories that we have related to ranchland histories.
Great.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes. Should I? So I'm going to start talking a little bit about like a general overview of the archives department or the archives program, some of the subject matters that we collect historic records on. And then as you see, the oral histories are just one part of the historic records that we collect. And just briefly to talk about the importance of oral histories, that they are definitely part of preserving our stories and the region's stories as a public service and cultural resource. Of course, supporting all of the other mentionings of legacy and outreach, inspiration and recognition. There's many folks that have inspiring things to share and or ways that they've done things in the past that we can learn from. But it's also an opportunity for us to recognize people, inclusion and diversity, always looking for those hidden stories. Sometimes those stories are hidden within the broader interviews that we do. And then, of course, it's supporting our planning and stewardship departments, the acquisition, stewardship, and design group. And then, of course, providing programming and exhibits and information for exhibits and panels. So just a brief review of how Ranchland oral histories came about. They were probably some of the first oral histories that we started doing here in the Park District. And they really started out of the naturalist, the interpretive services department. And it was during the late 70s, early 80s. We had a group of naturalists. There's 3 of them there on the screen. Tracy Gibbons up top, and then at the bottom photo is Dr. Bev Ortiz and Joanne Dean Freemeyer. These 3 women really started understanding that there were a lot of, especially at Black Diamond Mines, there were a lot of descendants that were still coming around and saying they had experiences there. And it really caught on to start interviewing these folks to make it part of their programming. There was also, and then it grew, and it moved into interpretation and recreation management, and it was managed out of there for many years until probably the last couple of years when it moved over to the archives department. And also, too, there has been a significant contributions towards resource analysis and land use plans for our ASD group, and doing historic site analysis. And that might even continue in more ways in the future for mitigation measures and architectural history research projects, but most particularly right now, the Tilden EEC, which we do have oral histories about. This is just the Ranchland contractors that we've had in the past, but also present. Right now, we have a contract with UC Berkeley, the Oral History Center, and they conduct a set of oral histories annually for us, which includes grazing tenants and or people who were former ranchers on the land. Tracy Gibbons, Chris Lynchu, Min Lee, and a few others. And we don't have an oral historian on our staff. So this is where we try to get this oral histories in their full completion is a lot of work, many hours of research. And then it's also reading through the transcripts and getting them prepared for the public. In overall, we have almost 600 oral histories, and we always have a backlog of incomplete transcripts. At our Ranchland oral histories, we have maybe about 60, and right now I'm working with UC Berkeley and community partners. It's a class called the Introduction to Natural and Cultural Resources, and the students are their project is to read these oral histories and create finding aids for hopefully an online web portal where people can actually do research on these. So yes, I mentioned the backlog, and the volunteers also help with that. And we do have one staff person that was helping with doing that research, and that was a temporary admin specialist at Black Diamond Mines. Her name is Crystal Jimenez. She's there in the picture. And she was hired about 10 years ago to work specifically on these oral histories through the INR department. And then as far as the other, what we were trying to do, and this is just my thing, I would love to have people know about these oral histories, but not only know about it, but be able to access it for themselves. And we are done with the master list in Excel format, but we do want to figure out how we can make it easy for people to access the 600 oral histories we have in that database. And of course, we have a lot of these transcripts in PDF. So it's a really, we can easily share a lot of these printed transcripts. And then quite recently, in the last couple of years, we did receive funding from the Regional Parks Foundation and the Park District to digitize our VHS and cassette tapes. We had quite a few, over 100 of them. Some of them were damaged beyond repair, and some took a little extra work by Media Preserve, which is a company out in Pennsylvania that actually does this work. And it's a lot different than sending it to your photo agency or company or local store to get digitized, because they're really looking for having an accessible copy, but also a digital copy that's actually a preservable format for the future. Okay, so that's that review, that part of the presentation. And then what happens is I step into talking a little bit about the grazing history and how that interlinks with us wanting to have these oral history, this oral history collection. So this is Tilden Regional Park in 1910-ish, around 1910. This is the Coran Ranch, and actually 1900, sorry. But this is the Coran Ranch. They were a dairy farm. This would have been before it was watershed land when East Bay Mud took it over. So please note the hills. They were grazed regularly. This is the Coran family. This is Mary Coran and her daughter sitting there in Tilden. Well, I call it sitting in Tilden Park, but it wasn't Tilden Park then. And then later in 1920, when the water companies started managing the land, they had a caretaker and this was the Bruno family. They were Italian immigrants, and they came and managed the dairy farm there and continued to graze. This picture from the perspective is taken from where the Brazilian Rooms parking lot is currently. So I go back to this picture real quick to show the grazed hills of Tilden. And this is mostly what Tilden Regional Park looks like now. Granted, there was some landscaping done and trees planted over the years by staff, but also too, you'll see the hills much more heavily chaparral and wooded areas, and less of the open grassland there.
So may I just ask, is that the same spot? Is that a picture of roughly the same spot as the?
It's roughly the same spot, but a little close up. It's very difficult to take then and now photos in Tilden,
Sure. Yeah.
because it's so wooded now. So it's kind of hard to take those then and now pictures. But yes, very similar. Yes.
So their ranch was more or less near where the Brazilian Room and Botanic Garden and that area.
Yes, that's correct.
Interesting.
And here's a map of Tilden and Wildcat Canyon. I'm not quite sure the date on this map, but you can see that the yellow is actually the open grassland areas, and the red, purple, et cetera, trees and or eucalyptus. And Wildcat Canyon has grazing on its lands, whereas Tilden has not had grazing on its land since 1950. And this was the park district before 1960. There's 6 parks and 7,400 acres. And most of the land was given or sold to the district. And then the ranchers and or the property owners vacated the land. So we didn't really have anyone who was relatively interested in staying on the land to do grazing, or was it within the capacity of the district at the time to handle that. And then after 1960, we did purchase some significant property in Sonole and Wildcat Canyon, as well as other areas in the park district that had ranchers still grazing on the property. And for a time, we did allow those ranchers to live on the land until they passed away or they moved away. But this was going on before the 1980s. A lot of grazing was going on in the park district. So this is a map of the grazing lands at the park district now. But there's a little bit of history before that time. And I have a picture there in the top right corner, and that's Ray Budzinski holding the map. Ray Budzinski in 1987 started the first grazing program for the Park District and formed a grazing task force, which included members of the board and the Park Advisory Committee and members of the public. They really wanted to get a handle on the grazing and some of the benefits that they were seeing for native vegetation, the native wildflowers and grasslands. But right before that, the reason why they had this grazing task force created is because at the same time there were environmental groups that were very concerned about the grazing going on in our parks and wanted to end grazing. But the Park District did win. There was a lawsuit, and the Park District did win that lawsuit, but it catapulted the district into managing a grazing program into the future. So that's my little story about how the grazing program started, and I would like to thank former wildland program manager Denise DeFries, who I got to talk to on the phone for a long time, as well as retiree, and he's a volunteer archives volunteer, Jerry Kent, who helped with a lot of this history, and I get to hear their stories a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to feature some of the people that we have interviewed. And Bud Battiati is from an Italian immigrant family from Oakland who got into the butchery work and started working up at the ranches at Pleasanton Ridge. This is the Cook Ranch. We have a few other interviews, and part of the media preserve digitization work that we did was to digitize these voices so that we have them. And so I'm going to play a little bit of Bud Battiati. And this, when I presented this to the Grazers dinner, it meant a lot to people. Bud passed away in 2018, but he was a well-loved and well-known person in the ranching world here in the East Bay.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
It's very quiet. Can you hear it?
No, I couldn't hear you. And I don't know if you've moved the slides, but I'm still looking at the Cook Ranches slide.
We haven't forwarded the slides yet.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, I just hadn't heard anything since when you.
Oh, okay.
introduced
So
it.
you can't hear the sound.
Now I can hear you. Now I don't know what happened, but now I can hear you. Okay.
Okay.
Strange.
So I do have recorded sound on the slides, but perhaps you can't hear it in the Zoom.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, probably not. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry to interrupt, but is there something that the technical staff can do so that anyone who's on Zoom can actually hear what's going on?
We're going to reset it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, let's hope you can hear this next sound recording. So I'm just going to click through and hopefully you can hear, but I'll introduce, we also interviewed Raylene View, and it was really great because at the Grazers dinner, she was present there. And so it was really neat for her to hear that she's from a family from France, and she's been ranching up at Vargas Plateau. And for right now, her daughter and granddaughter are running the business. They do have a manager, a cattle ranch manager, but they're fourth and fifth generation ranchers up at Vargas Plateau. So this is just a little clip of her talking about people coming up and visiting them.
They did a lot of entertaining from the city. The people would come for the weekend. I think I told you that they'd come for the weekend. My mother-in-law's family would come for the weekend. And I have pictures of, they'd have the table here with their homemade wine, and they'd bring mushrooms and quail, and that's
The
another
people
thing.
from the city brought the mushrooms?
Yes, but that was another thing. My father-in-law used to shoot quail and sell it to the restaurants.
Oh. And that was
Yeah.
a delicacy.
And they would bring bread and they'd bring different things. And for the weekend, they would just, they never went to the theater or, it was really family. And they just they would have a lot of fun because this was country. Can you imagine what the roads from San Francisco would be? And
Okay, so there's some technical blips here and there, but I'm hoping that you did hear that, Dr. Eccles.
Thank you very much.
Yay.
I did, yeah.
And here's one that is kind of we actually didn't even know we had this transcript, but it was part of the sound recordings that we made, or the digitized tapes. And this is Anita Alexander talking about, she was the daughter of the Muellers. Muellers had a ranch there in Las Trampas, kind of sort of near Little Hills.
of it, that was the first corral thing they had to round up the cattle in, and later on they had the roundups right over here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And at that time, you were all living in Oakland still?
We were all living in Oakland, right.
Okay. And so you would come out here for the roundups?
We'd come out here for the roundups, and we'd come out every single weekend, and with just a little dirt road from the beginning of the canyon on Crow Canyon, and sometimes it was so muddy, we'd have to park our cars up there, and we'd walk all the way back here to the cabin here.
Oh, wow.
All of us, right.
And I would be remiss to not talk about Deer Valley, Roddy Ranch, and Black Diamond Mines. Now, this did start back in the late 70s, early 80s with Tracy Gibbons and the other naturalists. They started collecting a lot of oral histories, but it has continued interviewing, and we have folks like Jack Roddy and other individuals associated with the land. And it was actually these oral histories that we have recordings of that had another partner who came in very interested in having us digitize these tapes and video. And that was the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation folks. They really wanted to see and encouraged the naturalist staff at the time to find a way to digitize these. And that's how we ended up getting them digitized as well. And this is just a little interesting. This is a Jack Loffer, and a little feature about the Loffer Ranch there at Black Diamond Mines. And he had, if you go to Sydney Flat Visitor Center, his farm and ranch area is right across the street. There, some of the buildings are still there, but a lot of them were moved. There were some cabins and camps where the folks that worked on the ranch stayed, and then he also stayed there. And he was kind of a character to be working across the street from. The oral histories, I just did a little copy there of a clip of what the oral histories for him look like in printed transcript. But we do have his video and his recorded voice as well. But I just love these. These are kind of like B-roll of him just hanging out. And this is my last feature. This is Mary Keach Butterfield, and this is the ranch. It's the Laughlin Ranch. It's out at Brushy Peak. You will actually see remnants of that as well as you go into the staging area there at Brushy Peak. She is the great-granddaughter of the Laughlins, but still had memories of as a child growing up around that. And for the Grazers presentation, I did talk about that this was, to me, like a personal connection with her stories as well, because I did grow up on a farm in Vernalis, and had a grandpa that I knew about horses, I knew about cattle, and I really had a rich childhood from that. So anyways, I'm going to share her story.
Those out on the line. Next to that was called the separator house.
Okay.
Because a milk separator. They milked cows, and they would have had a milk separator in there. In fact, there was one still there when I was a child, and they still did do some separating.
Separating the
milk
whey.
from the cream.
Milk from the cream.
And it was put into milk cans and cream cans.
Did they sell any of that, do you think?
I know that my grandparents did when they had that many cows. I think probably by the time I was a child and spending a lot of time at Aunt Lily and Uncle Joe's, by that time they only had enough for their own personal use at the house, and so there wasn't any selling. But that was the big thing with ranchers. There was a creamery in Livermore that you could bring your milk and cream to. My mother did that even in high school.
So when she mentioned the creamery that was in Livermore, it was a lot of the ranching families also knew about that creamery, I guess. And historically, I don't think it's there anymore. And that's the end of my presentation. And I will take any questions or comments.
Great, thank you so much. Director Mercurio, did you have any questions?
Well, I guess a comment, a thanks to everybody who's involved in that, whether they're district employees or contractors. I know they have a needed role in all this. And I just know how, having done some historical research myself, to get at the voices of the people who lived the history that you want to learn about and that you want to capture for distribution to anybody who will read it later is really important. And so I really put a lot of value that in this function that we do here at the district, because we cover a lot of area and we cover a lot of stuff that happened, and I'm sure there's a lot more to the oral history holdings that we have beyond the grazing is the obvious one, I guess, right? Because a lot of the land is there, but there's other things too, I'm sure that you have in there and that would be useful to researchers in the future. So anyway, thanks for making it happen.
Thank you, Dr. Mercurio. Yes, that is true. We do have other subject matters that are also just amazing histories.
Can you take down the slides? Because I'm not able to see the folks in the room or on Zoom. Ah, there we go. Thank you very much. That's much better. Okay. Okay. So before we continue, I just got a note from Jason with a concern about a quorum. So I'm just trying to clarify, because my understanding, we had raised this issue when we knew that Colin may or may not be able to participate. And my understanding that 2 out of 3 was a quorum. So I'm just waiting for him to, oh no.
Jason is here.
Oh, okay, Jason, can you clarify then? Okay, I just saw your text.
Good afternoon, Director Eccles. Can you hear me? Yeah, so with the new change in law with AB 2449, the quorum is 2, but we need at least a quorum present in person to comply with the remote Zoom requirements. So that is the nuance here.
Oh.
So recognize this is, there's no actions being taken today. So there are, informational items, but ideally we would reschedule this for when we have a quorum present for the full discussion.
Okay. If that's legal advice, I guess that's what we should do. Were you going to say something, Director Mercurio? You look like you're
just that we're all still learning this stuff. It's changing, and it's a moving target. Maybe it'll change again, before too long. But this is just stuff that happens. So we don't have to clear the room because we're not doing anything but informational stuff. Is that true?
Well, we are technically not complying with the Brown Act, but our advice would be to reschedule this for a future meeting. But if the members want to continue, it's just a briefing.
No, not against legal advice. I apologize. I didn't plan to be there in person, but am unwell, so I had to make a last minute change.
And I'm sorry for the late minute. I just became aware of it. So sorry for jumping in. And
okay. Well, I'm really sorry. I guess, personally, if legal thinks this could be a technical violation of the Brown Act, even if we're not, we don't have any action items for recommendations. So, but I don't want to proceed contrary to legal advice. So I guess we're going to have to reschedule. I'm sorry, Rebecca. And John and Ken and Lisa and everybody else, Alex, everyone else who's there present. So
We'll be in
I'm,
touch to reschedule.
okay, I'm going to go ahead and,
Thank you all. And sorry about
John,
that.
John, did you want to say, you look
I
like you want
guess
say
you're going to
something.
adjourn the meeting now. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a call separately, but yeah, I think we should adjourn the meeting because it's not worth being in technical violation of the Brown Act. It's unfortunate. Okay.